Welcome to Oxford News This Week. I'm Elgin Nichols.
And I'm Terry Stiles. And in this week's local news, reckless drivers in the school parking lot and local business delivers to Oxford VFW.
Stay tuned and learn more about these stories and others. The Oxford News begins right now. An Oxford resident reported to police that her television was stolen, and she suspects the culprit is her son. She stated that her son had been staying at her home, but he abruptly left the area without leaving a forwarding address. The only help she could give police is her son's phone number. The investigation continues.
A former Oxford High School student apparently did not realize that his reckless driving in the school parking lot was all caught on tape. But the ticket he received was the convincing evidence he needed after a faculty member watched the daredevil drive pulling donuts in the school parking lot. They were able to get his identification from the school cameras, the security tape. So next time you want to drive in the parking lot at school, be safe.
And Oakland County Sheriff's deputies arrested an Oxford man on assault charges after receiving a 911 call from his girlfriend that he had attacked her with a knife. When officers arrived, they found the couple had been drinking and were in an argument, and the girlfriend was bleeding from her arm. The man was arrested and taken to the Oakland County Jail.
An East Mill Street resident is alive and well after finding a live high-voltage wire fell across his car last week. The man notified police, who in turn notified DTE to make the area safe again.
Another Oxford resident found their identity had been pilfered this week and discovered the breach when someone opened a Verizon account, chalking up fees of over $600. While the man was filing a report with local police, another man came in to the office reporting that someone used his identity to charge over $573, also to a Verizon wireless account.
Gary Deeg and Bonnie Staley are the newest members appointed to the Oxford Village Planning Commission, but not without a bit of conflict after Staley expressed that she was ashamed to tell people that she lives in Oxford. But later she clarified her harsh statement.
Here's the thing, Oxford doesn't stand out. And that's bottom line. And if that's not going to put me on the planning commission, I can't help it, but that's the way it is. We do not stand out.
Afterwards, Council President Bassardi supported the appointment with caution and requested to have further conversations with Staley about her Oxford opinion.
I'm not going to debate some of the points with you, but we need to sit down and talk about some things at another time, because I disagree and agree with some of the things you're saying. And I'm willing to give you a chance. I know that Tom didn't create a very good impression with the Planning Commission when we first met him, but he's turned out to be a very good member of the Planning Commission, and I enjoyed immensely working with him. I think that some of your ideas are not the responsibility of the Planning Commission and beyond the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission can't do anything about it. But the only way that you're going to figure some of that out is to actually sit there and see what the Planning Commission does. So for that reason, I would go along with your appointment.
The entire meeting can be seen at any time by clicking on OCCTV.org. Then search for our program schedule and any meeting you want to see.
Deputies made an arrest of a woman living on Crestwood Street in Oxford. She was taken under custody for a criminal bench warrant charge for failure to appear at a court hearing in Lake Orion. The woman was transported to the village police station, where Lake Orion police were only too happy to pick her up.
A local businessman has donated $1,000 to the Oxford local VFW Post 334. Dr. Sam Caruso, who owns the Caruso Chiropractic Clinic in Lake Orion, gave the $1,000 check to Post Quartermaster Jim Braden of VFW Post 334. Caruso said he decided to donate to the post after finally asking Braden about the post after seeing insignia on his jacket. Caruso states he plans plans to make this an annual event. Braden said the gift and others go to help needy veterans and their families. The VFW also supports the National Home for Children and several local projects.
Oxford Fire Chief Pete Schultz reported that last year firefighters responded to over 2,044 calls, of which 1,739 were medical related. In November, voters approved a $1 million increase for the fire department, and some of that new millage will be used to hire additional firemen to fill rising community response needs. Chief Schultz would like to hire 2 additional full-time firefighters / paramedics, plus create a part-time position. I think that's good. He's watching out for the safety of the residents.
He sure is.
Yep.
And not to knock the fire department, but boy, oh boy, that's exactly the amount of rides that the Addison Township NOTA riders took last year. So it's funny how that amount is a big enough amount for this community to say, yes, we'll give you more money for it, but not big enough for another community that they're asking money for. So I find that ironic, and we had that conversation earlier this week, so I had to bring that up, but good for the fire department.
And that's a little bit of Terry trivia for today.
Terry trivia and Terry's opinion, like she's always got one.
Well, one of the things that kind of bugs me is this time of the year, people that drive recklessly and put other people in danger the way they drive. It's so icy out there. It comes to mind, the traffic accident. I believe is in I-94 or M94.
Right. That 200 truck pileup. Yeah, that was pretty scary.
And
glad I wasn't out there.
Yeah, and police say that it was due to the fact that people were driving too close, too fast to the other vehicles, and 1 or 2 lost control, and it just created a catastrophic situation. So you folks out there, road rage, that kind of thing, driving too close, remember, it is winter and it's icy out there. It's dangerous.
I drive a Jeep, and it's amazing how many people are right on my tail because I'm driving a Jeep. They expect me to go faster when I'm not gonna. I am not gonna endanger myself. Or if you do get in an accident, you're not only endangering the person that you're in the accident with, but what about those firefighters and those first responders? They're having to speed out in that kind of weather, and then they're exposing themselves to more of that pileup kind of thing.
Oh, absolutely.
It's so not necessary to go faster.
Well, the thing that kind of amazes me is the fact that you driving your Jeep, you don't even drive it on the road, you drive it through the fields, and if you have these cars following you, it's safer.
I'm trying to stay away from the traffic over the river and through the woods. That's it for Oxford News this week. If you'd like to learn more about these stories and others, go to any local store and pick up a copy of the Oxford Leader newspaper, or better yet, catch us right here at Oxford Community Television.
Well, tune in for Oxford local sports and catch Oxford School News with John Ochins. After that, join us with Auto Talk and Science in the News with Dave Kenny.
I'm Terry Stiles. This is Oxford News This Week, where your news is closer to home.
And I'm Elgin Nichols. Remember, always be friends to your neighbors, and thanks for watching.
Welcome to Science in the News. I'm Dave Kenny, and these stories are taken from the publication New Scientist. In our first story, private spaceflight firm SpaceX launched its 5th cargo mission to the International Space Station, but its test landing of its first stage of its Falcon 9 rocket on a boat was unsuccessful. Most rockets are built for a single use only, falling into the sea once their fuel is spent. SpaceX CEO Elon Musk has likened this to throwing away your aircraft every time you fly and identified it as a key reason for the high cost of space flight. That's why SpaceX has attempted to land its first stage of its Falcon 9 rocket with an eye to reusing it. After previous launches, the company has fired up its rockets as they return to Earth, deploying a set of landing legs and reducing their speed, but ultimately still landing in the ocean. It has also conducted small-scale land-based tests of its Grasshopper rocket. For this latest flight, SpaceX positioned an autonomous barge off the coast of Florida in an attempt to first ever land its Falcon 9 rocket on a solid surface following the launch from Cape Canaveral, Florida, sending an unmanned Dragon capsule on its way to the ISS. On its way down, the rocket successfully hit the barge, but it came in too fast and was destroyed. Close, but no cigar this time, tweeted Musk shortly after the attempted landing, which took place about 10 minutes after takeoff. Musk also said it was too dark and foggy to get video of the landing, but SpaceX now plans to analyze data from the flight and try again with a future launch. A successful landing will place SpaceX in a league of its own, as the ability to reuse rockets could drastically lower the cost of getting into orbit, though there are many more tests required before we see a second-hand rocket fly into space. Back on Earth, imagine if we could turn back time. A team has identified a new way which cells age, has also reversed it, giving old mice younger bodies. One way mammalian cells produce energy is via aerobic respiration. That takes place mainly in mitochondria, the powerhouse of cells. While mitochondria carry their own genomes, some cellular components needed for respiration are produced by the nucleus, so the two must coordinate their activities. As we age, mitochondrial function declines, which can lead to disease. To investigate why, Anna Gomes at Harvard Medical School and her colleagues compared levels of messenger RNA, molecules that convey genetic information around a cell, for the cellular components needed for respiration in the skeletal muscle of 6 and 22-month-old mice. Levels of this messenger RNA in the nucleus were similar in young and old mice, while levels in the mitochondria decreased with age. Similar changes were seen in mice lacking a protein called SIRT1. These mice also had higher levels of a protein produced by the nucleus called HIF1 alpha. This suggests that communication between the nucleus and the mitochondria depends on events involving both these proteins. As long as SIRT1 levels remain high, this type of aging is kept at bay. But SIRT1 levels are controlled by another molecule called NAD+. And crucially, that declines with age, leading to a breakdown in communication. To see if they could fix this breakdown, the team injected the old mice twice daily for a week with a molecule known to increase NAD+. At the end of the week, markers for muscular atrophy and inflammation had dropped, and the mice developed a muscle type common in 6-month-old mice. It gives us a new pathway to target that can reverse some aspects of aging, says Gomes, and it can't happen too soon for me. And still on the medical front, here's something not to be sneezed at. A vaccine against grass pollen, which can cause hay fever, has been shown as safe and is effective in a trial of 180 patients. If larger trials are a success, a vaccine could be available within 4 years. Hay fever is caused by the immune system's immunoglobulin E, or IgE, antibodies reacting excessively to pollen. Therapy to prevent this reaction typically builds up immunity by injecting regular small doses of pollen over several years. To offer faster relief, Biome, a firm in Vienna, Austria, has developed a shot that combines part of the pollen molecule with a hepatitis B protein. The IgE antibodies still get activated, but the protein mobilizes other antibodies which block the IgE ones. This prevents an excessive immune response. Just 4 injections over a few months should be all that's required, says Angela Neubauer of Biome. And once again, that can't happen too soon for me. Well, that's it for this edition of Science in the News. I'm Dave Kenny. Stay tuned to Oxford Community Television. We'll be right back.
You're watching OCTV.
I'm John Ochins, and welcome to the Oxford Wildcat School Update. Let the search begin. On Tuesday the 13th, the Oxford Board of Education swung into action to get the selection process for a new superintendent started. The board is hiring a company called the Michigan Leadership Institute. Charles Andrews, one of their representatives, came to answer any of the board's questions about the process. The company is a privately held Michigan-based consulting firm. They serve K through 12 school districts and public institutions like community colleges and municipalities to help them find skilled leaders. The cost is $5,500. The board has until the end of August to fill the position. Superintendent community forums will be resuming on January 20th. The first will be at the Oxford Community Schools Administration Building at 10 North Washington at 6:30 p.m. These forums are designed to provide district updates and give you an opportunity to ask questions and give your input about our schools. Future forums will be on Tuesday, March 17th and Tuesday, May 12th, both at 6:30 p.m. We caught up with Oakland University educator Bill Richardson for My Life a few days ago. Bill's been to China 26 times, teaching English to teachers over there. We talked with Bill about education in China and their desire to send their kids abroad. Here's a little taste.
Yeah, John, there's no question, and because I made that first trip to China in 1988, and here we are in 2014, almost 15, what I've seen going on in China is just staggering. It's a time warp. And the whole impetus right now in China with families is to how do I get my child involved in a program that would allow them to study internationally. The number one target internationally certainly is the United States of America. If that doesn't come to pass, then it becomes Britain, it becomes Canada, Australia. Those are other major areas that the Chinese are looking at. But there's no question that from their standpoint, they want very, very much for their children to study here. Chinese education, John, and to the audience, is relatively backward. There's a notion out there that in America, for example, boy, I wish our students would be as good as the Chinese students. Well, there's a lot more to it, John, than that. Our students are head and shoulders above the Chinese from an educational standpoint. They are much more in tune with the world. The whole focus in China is to prepare students well for the examination, which will allow them to move from primary school to the best junior high, from the best junior high to the best senior high.
You can catch My Life at 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. on Saturday on Charter 191 and AT&T 99. You can also see it on our website, occtv.org. He's an interesting guy. On Schooling Around, we're taking a look at special education in Oxford. In the first show, we visit with Denise Sweet, our Assistant Superintendent for Student Services. One of the things we talked about was the division of specialties between our schools.
Every building has resource rooms because the majority of the students that we service have a mild disability. They're learning disabled, they have attention deficit, they're speech and language impaired. So we have resource rooms in every building. At Clear Lake, we have our program for cognitively impaired students. So we have a self-contained program, a teacher, 3 parapros, and about 9 students. Those students have significant impairments. They have speech and language impairments, cognitive impairments, emotional needs. That's at Clear Lake. At Leonard, we have our special ed preschool program. So we include students in the GSRP preschool. We work on goals and objectives, most on language development to try to get kids ready for kindergarten. At Lakeville, we have 2 classrooms for students on the autism spectrum disorder.
You can see Schooling Around on our cable channels at 11 a.m. and 10 p.m. during the week and 11 a.m. on Saturdays. We were visited by local Cub Scouts from Leonard this week. About a dozen kids from Den 8, Pack 4 Wolves paid us a visit and toured the studio. They also did a little promo for us.
You're watching OCTV.
Way to go, guys. You're always welcome at our house. That's the Oxford School News for this week. Dave Kenny is up next with Science in the News, and then Wildcat Sports. You have a great week. This is Oxford Community Television, keeping it local.
And welcome back to Oxford News this week. Time for sports. The Wildcats took their first loss on the hardwood earlier this last week after falling to Royal Oak 62-53. According to Coach Henning, it was a blessing because the kids were able to see that they were a really good team, but if they didn't bring it together every night, they could lose on any given night. That being said, Henning was not so upset about the loss, but in the manner in which they lost. However, the loss didn't keep them down for long. The Wildcats roared back by playing their best effort, and a really big win against Berkeley, 79-57. Oxford had 4 players who had double digits. Another highlight of that game was that Oxford's defense held Berkeley's #1 scorer, Jonathan Ratner, who normally averages 21 points a game. He kept them down below 13. The boys will face off against Harrison this next week on a Thursday night game. We'll have the results in next week's broadcast. The Lady Wildcats record goes to 5-3 after a 1-1 record this past week. Oxford escaped the Milford Highlanders after beating them 41-35 on January 6th. The Wildcats outscored the Highlanders in each of the first 3 quarters, but could never quite pull away. Entering the 4th quarter, the Wildcats maintained a 13-point advantage. However, the Highlanders came roaring off the Highlands, I guess, and storming back for a 14-7 in the final period. The Highlanders were led by Elise Gustafson with 15 points. Haley Kassab had 10. In the victory, the Wildcats were led by Jessica Murphy with 15 points. Sky Donaldson, that's a basketball name I have to tell you, chipped away at 10 while fouling out in the contest. Sherilyn Bannis had 7 assists. Concerned about the 5-3 record, according to the coach, we are working hard, we are improving constantly. However, we need to improve our execution in the later games. That was evident in both the Milford and Stony Creek game, according to Coach Steve Emmert. We have now split wins and lost with Stony Creek. We realize that only 10 points separate us, our 5-3 record, to where we could have been an 8-0. They look forward to playing Bloomfield Hills. Again, we'll have the results on next week's broadcast. Competitive cheer, well, it gets down to the points. The Lady Wildcat competitive cheerleaders placed 4th in the 6th annual Mardi Gras Mambo competitive cheer invite that was hosted at the Oxford High School. That took place on January 10th. The girls took 4th with a score of 680.98 out of 7 teams, which included Cousino, Lakeshore, Roseville, Troy, Athens, and Utica. Athens took first with a 750.52, following Cousino with a 742.56. Troy had third, their score there, 719.7. Collier Lanes was the place to be on Monday night when the Oxford Wildcats took on the Clarkston Wolves. The bowling is what we're talking about. They faced off in the girls' match. The Wildcats won both Baker games. They jumped out to a 10-0 lead. The Oxford ladies then closed out the match, shooting a new school record of 1040. Final score of that match, Oxford 22, the Wolves had 8. In the boys bowling, Clarkston took a 10-0 lead by winning both Baker games. Game 1 went down to the 10th frame. Oxford pulled out with a 1096 to 1087 win over Clarkston. Drew Pappas led the way for the Wildcats with 276 effort in that game in Game 1. Game 2 was even more amazing. Both teams tossed strike after strike. Oxford shot an astounding 1184 to win the match 18-12 over Clarkston. The 1184 score is a brand new school record for Oxford boys varsity bowling. Our own coach and football announcer of the bowling team, quoting him now, "It's not very often you see something like this. Both programs are strong programs for both of the, as they bowl the best for each team." According to Coach J.R. Laffner, "We feel very fortunate to have come out on top today. Our kids showed a lot of mental toughness today." According to him, he said, "I'm a very proud coach." Good job in bowling. I'm always a gutter bowler. Catch all the sports right here, OCTV, on Saturday and Sundays. We're on the air 1 p.m. to 6 p.m. If you happen to miss it on the air and you want to catch it 24/7, it's at your fingertips, OCCTV.org. Hit the Programs tab. We upload all our Oxford sporting contests there. That's Oxford Sports for this week. Oxford News this week will continue on. Have yourself a wonderful week. We'll see you again. Take care of yourselves.
Welcome to this edition of Auto Talk. I'm Dave Kenny, and these stories are taken from the publication Automotive News. In our first story, the second-generation Chevrolet Volt will go about 50 miles on an electric charge, up from 38 on today's model, as General Motors looks to broaden the plug-in hybrid's appeal beyond environmentalists and tech geeks. The 2016 Volt, unveiled at the North American International Auto Show, is a clean-sheet redesign of the groundbreaking first iteration that went on sale in the late 2010. GM says the car will be quicker off the line and quieter inside when it hits showrooms in the second half of this year. Not a single part was carried over from the first generation's drive unit, and the battery pack, the most costly component, is almost entirely re-engineered and redesigned too. The new drive unit is about 100 pounds lighter and will deliver 19% better acceleration from 0 to 30 by having both electric motors deliver power to the wheels rather than one in both EV and in gasoline modes. That setup increases efficiency and produces better acceleration and a smoother ride, engineers say. GM made the battery cells larger and increased their storage capacity by 20%, but reduced the total to 192 cells from 288. Overall, the battery pack will store more energy than the current one. A new 1.5-liter engine versus today's 1.4-liter extends the total range to about 400 miles and returns an improved 41 miles per gallon in non-EV driving. And GM revealed the Chevrolet Bolt, that's B-O-L-T, a concept battery electric vehicle that it says will get around 200 miles of range from a single charge. GM intends to get the Bolt into production sometime in 2017, according to a person with knowledge of the company's plans. It will be priced somewhere in the low to mid $30,000 and under $30,000 after a federal tax credit for EV purchases. And still at GM, on the eve of the Detroit Auto Show, Buick unveiled the 2016 Cascada, a rebadged version of the identically named Opel convertible that debuted in Europe last year. The Cascada, Spanish for waterfall, is scheduled to go on sale in early 2016. It uses a 2x2 layout. The car's 1.6-liter turbocharged engine will produce 200 horsepower. Its soft top, that is, will retract in just 17 seconds at speeds up to 31 miles per hour. The car has a windswept profile with a steeply raked A-pillar. A distinctive crease runs along the side panels over the door handle for a high belt line. The soft top folds completely beneath a hard-to-know cover behind the rear seats, giving the car a pure open-air aesthetic, Buick said. The engine produces an estimated 206 pounds-feet of torque with an overboost feature that briefly increases it to 221. It's paired to a 6-speed automatic transmission. 20-inch wheels come standard. The car's suspension system uses a version of the Hyper strut front suspension used on the LaCrosse and the Regal sedans. A Watts Z-Link rear suspension centers the axle during cornering and improves balance, GM said. Inside, the center stack features a 7-inch display for the Buick IntelliLink infotainment system. The instrument panel is wrapped in stitched soft leather. Safety features include lane departure warning and active rollover safety system, which automatically deploys protection bars behind the rear seats if a potential rollover is detected. And on the recall front, 18 months into a recall of Jeeps with exploding gas tanks, drivers of the affected models are still dying and more than 1 million of the vehicles remain unfixed. A top safety regulator has called the slow pace of repairs woeful and demanded that executives do more to reach owners of the affected Jeep Liberty and Grand Cherokee models, which can catch fire after being rear-ended. FCA US, the Fiat Chrysler Automobile's NV division that owns the Jeep brand, says it's moving as quickly as possible given the challenge of finding drivers of vehicles that are between 7 and 20 years old. The company says the vehicles met the crash protection standards in place when they were introduced and that the severity of the crashes is a factor. Besides the 6 recent deaths, regulators have recently identified 56 fatalities in 38 crashes involving 2002 to 2007 Jeep Liberty and 1993 to 1998 Jeep Grand Cherokee models. By comparison, 4 deaths in the U.S. have been linked to defective airbags made by Takata Corporation. In 2013, CEO Sergio Marchionne agreed to install a trailer hitch to help protect the fuel tank on the affected models. In November, David Friedman, Deputy Director of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, wrote Marchionne to lament the woeful rate of repairs. After a recall, automakers must tell regulators every quarter how many cars they fixed. Friedman said he was surprised that FCA had repaired only 3% of the 1.56 million recalled vehicles in the previous 6 months. That's the lowest rate of any recall of more than 1 million vehicles in the past 5 years. Of the 5 fatal accidents since the recall, all have occurred on highways. Well, that's all for this edition of Auto Talk. I'm Dave Kenny, and as always, may the wind be at your back as you cruise down life's highways. Stay tuned to Oxford Community Television, and we'll be right back.
Just one final reminder. You can locate our OCTV program schedule by going to our website, occtv.org, and clicking on Schedule. There you will find a list of OCTV broadcast programs, dates, and times. One program I highly recommend is Bill Service, who always has interesting local stories and interviews on our Community Access program. Check it out. This is Oxford Community Television, OCTV. I'm your host, Elgin Nichols.